Welcome to our Christian channel, Whispers of Bible. If you are a true Christian, or if you are looking to grow deeper in your faith, this is the place for you. We invite you to subscribe, like, and share this channel with your family, friends, and fellow Christians. Let them be a part of this journey with us as we dive into the wisdom of the Bible, share God's love, and walk together in faith. Share this channel with your loved ones and encourage them to join us in this spiritual journey. Let's build a community of believers, supporting each other as we grow closer to God. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and share the message with those who are ready to experience the whispers of God.
The miracles of Jesus stand at the heart of the gospel narratives, not as isolated wonders meant to astonish, but as windows into the character of God and the nature of His kingdom. To approach these miracles rightly, we must resist the temptation to view them merely as supernatural interruptions of natural order. In the biblical worldview, miracles are not spectacles designed to entertain curiosity. They are signs deliberate, meaningful acts through which God reveals His compassion, authority, and redemptive intent. Each healing, restoration, and act of power participates in a larger story, God drawing near to a broken world. Before examining the miracles themselves, it is essential to understand the world into which Jesus stepped. First-century Judea was a land marked by tension, political, social, and spiritual. The people lived under Roman occupation, their daily lives shaped by foreign rule, heavy taxation, and the constant presence of imperial power. While Rome allowed a measure of religious freedom, the weight of subjugation pressed deeply upon Jewish identity. Long-standing hopes for deliverance were intensified by hardship, and expectations of a Messiah who would restore Israel's fortunes circulated widely. Spiritually, the landscape was equally complex. Jewish life revolved around the law, the temple, and inherited traditions that sought to preserve covenant faithfulness amid external pressure. Various groups, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and others offered different interpretations of how Israel should live before God. Yet despite their differences, all shared a deep longing for God's intervention. Centuries had passed since the voices of the prophets had fallen silent. Many believed God had withdrawn His direct action, leaving Israel to wait in hope and uncertainty. Illness and suffering were pervasive realities in this world. Medical knowledge was limited, and disease often carried social as well as physical consequences. Leprosy, blindness, paralysis, and chronic illness could isolate individuals from community life, worship, and livelihood. Suffering was not merely a personal burden. It was a communal and spiritual crisis. Many interpreted illness as a sign of sin or divine displeasure, a belief that deepened shame and exclusion for those already afflicted. It is into this environment that Jesus of Nazareth begins His ministry. The Gospels present Him not first as a miracle worker, but as a teacher proclaiming the nearness of the kingdom of God. His message announces that God's reign, long awaited, deeply hoped for, is now breaking into history. The miracles that follow are inseparable from this proclamation. They are not random acts of kindness or demonstrations of raw power. They are enacted theology, visible expressions of what God's kingdom looks like when it encounters human need. The Hebrew Scriptures provide essential background for understanding these acts. Israel's sacred texts contain accounts of God's mighty deeds, parting seas, healing the sick, providing food in the wilderness. These acts were never ends in themselves. They revealed God's covenant faithfulness and His concern for His people. The prophets spoke of a future age when the blind would see, the lame would walk, and the oppressed would be set free. These promises formed the imaginative and theological framework through which Jesus' miracles would later be interpreted. Yet there is a crucial difference between past expectation and present fulfillment. When Jesus heals, restores, and raises, He does so with an authority that astonishes both crowds and critics. He does not invoke another name or appeal to ritual formulas. He speaks and acts directly. This immediacy signals something unprecedented. God's power is no longer mediated only through sacred spaces or prophetic intermediaries. It is embodied in a person moving among the people, touching the untouchable and speaking life where death has encroached. The Gospel writers are careful in how they record these events. They do not present Jesus as a magician or healer for hire. Often Jesus resists public acclaim, instructing those healed to remain silent. At other times, he challenges the motives of those seeking signs. This restraint reveals an important truth. The miracles are not meant to replace faith, but to awaken it. They invite trust rather than coercing belief. Faith itself emerges as a central theme in the miracle stories. Sometimes it is explicitly named the faith of a centurion, a woman reaching through a crowd, friends lowering a paralyzed man through a roof. At other times, faith is implied through persistence, hope, or willingness to approach Jesus despite social barriers. Yet faith is never portrayed as a technique that forces God's hand. Instead, it is relational openness, trust, directed toward Jesus as the source of life and restoration. Equally important is the social dimension of Jesus' miracles. Many acts of healing restore individuals not only physically but relationally. A leper cleansed can return to community. A woman freed from chronic bleeding can re-enter worship. A man forgiven and healed can stand again among his neighbors. In this way, miracles function as acts of justice and mercy, reversing exclusion and restoring dignity. They reveal a God who cares deeply about wholeness in every dimension of life. The opposition Jesus faces also provides critical context. Religious leaders often question the legitimacy of his miracles, not denying their reality, but challenging their source or timing. Healings performed on the Sabbath provoke intense debate. These conflicts expose competing visions of God's priorities. Is the Sabbath a boundary that restricts mercy, or a gift meant to sustain life? Jesus' miracles consistently align with the latter interpretation, asserting that compassion lies at the heart of God's law. Politically, Jesus' miracles carry implicit change. In a world where power is associated with domination, control, his power is expressed through service and healing. He does not overthrow Rome through force, yet his actions undermine assumptions about authority and legitimacy. By restoring the marginalized, Jesus enacts a quiet but profound reversal of values. The kingdom he reveals does not mirror imperial strength. It redefines greatness through mercy. The term miracle itself requires careful handling. In the Gospels, these acts are often called signs or works. This language emphasizes meaning over amazement. A sign points beyond itself. Each miracle gestures toward a deeper reality, forgiveness of sins, victory over chaos, the nearness of God's reign. To focus solely on the extraordinary nature of the act is to miss its purpose. As we begin this journey through the miracles of Jesus, it is important to adopt the posture the Gospels invite. These stories ask not only to be observed, but to be entered. They invite readers to consider where they stand within the narrative, among the crowds, the skeptics, the desperate, or the healed. They ask whether we see miracles as interruptions to normal life, or as revelations of what life is meant to be under God's reign. The miracles of Jesus do not offer escape from the world's brokenness. They confront it directly. They reveal a God who does not remain distant from suffering, but steps into it. They show that faith is not blind optimism, but trust awakened by encounter. And they prepare the way for a deeper understanding of Jesus himself, not merely as a healer, but as the one through whom God's restoring work enters history. In the parts that follow, we will explore the cultural context of those who encountered Jesus, the early moments of his miracle-working ministry, the conflicts these acts provoked, and the spiritual transformation they inspired. We will listen carefully to what these miracles reveal about God's heart, and consider how their message continues to speak into modern life. For now, we begin where the Gospel writers begin, with a world longing for healing, a people waiting for God's intervention, and a man from Nazareth whose presence changes what healing, faith, and hope will mean forever. To understand the miracles of Jesus as the Gospel writers intended, we must linger within the cultural and human world of those who encountered him. Miracles do not occur in abstraction. They take place within bodies shaped by expectation, fear, tradition, and longing. The healing acts of Jesus gain their full meaning only when we recognize the social realities of first-century Jewish life and the formative influences that shaped Jesus' early years. This context reveals why the miracles were both received with hope and resisted with suspicion. First-century Jewish society was deeply communal. Identity was not primarily individual, but collective, defined by family, tribe, and covenant membership. Health, therefore, was never merely personal. To be physically unwell often meant to be socially diminished. Illness could disrupt family roles, exclude individuals from worship, and sever participation in community life. For many, healing was not simply the restoration of bodily function, it was the restoration of belonging. Purity laws intensified this reality. Certain conditions rendered a person ritually unclean, restricting access to the temple and communal rituals. These laws were not arbitrary. They expressed a theology in which holiness mattered deeply, and where boundaries symbolized reverence for God's presence. Yet in practice, they could produce layers of exclusion, particularly for those whose conditions were chronic or misunderstood. The blind, the lame, lepers, and women with ongoing illness often lived at the margins, not by choice but by necessity. Economic vulnerability compounded these challenges. Illness frequently meant loss of livelihood. A paralyzed man could not farm. A blind beggar depended on charity. Without modern systems of care, survival rested on family support or public mercy. When Jesus heals, he intervenes not only in physical suffering, but in cycles of poverty and dependence. His miracles restore agency as well as health. Religious interpretation of illness further shaped expectations. Many believed suffering was directly linked to sin, either personal wrongdoing or ancestral failure. While Scripture offers a more nuanced view, this assumption remained powerful in popular thought. As a result, the sick often carried not only pain but shame. Jesus' willingness to heal without first assigning blame represents a radical shift. His miracles challenge the logic that equates suffering with moral failure, revealing a God more concerned with restoration than accusation. Within this world, Jesus himself emerges from a humble and largely hidden beginning. The Gospels provide limited detail about his early life, yet what they include is significant. Jesus is born not into privilege but into obscurity. Raised in Nazareth, a small village of little renown, he grows up within a working family. His early years are shaped by manual labor, shared religious practice, and immersion in the scriptures of Israel. This grounding matters. Jesus' miracles are not detached displays of power. They emerge from a life fully embedded in human experience. Jesus' upbringing within Jewish tradition also frames his understanding of healing. The Hebrew scriptures portray God as healer and restorer, one who binds up wounds and renews life. Psalms and prophetic writings speak of God's compassion toward the afflicted and his desire for wholeness. Jesus' miracles do not introduce a new divine impulse. They embody a long-held promise now made visible. The expectations surrounding the Messiah further inform how miracles are perceived. Many anticipated a deliverer who would restore Israel politically and militarily. Others hoped for a spiritual renewal marked by justice and faithfulness. The prophets spoke of signs accompanying God's future intervention: blind eyes opened, captives freed, the poor lifted up. When Jesus performs miracles, these texts echo in the collective memory. His actions provoke the question, is this the moment God's promises are being fulfilled? Yet Jesus does not align neatly with popular expectations. His miracles do not serve nationalistic ambition. He heals Romans and Jews alike, touches the ritually unclean, and responds to faith rather than pedigree. This universality unsettles established boundaries. If God's healing power is not reserved for the righteous or the ethnically pure, then long-standing assumptions about privilege and access are called into question. The early figures who surround Jesus help illuminate this tension. John the Baptist, who precedes Jesus' public ministry, calls people to repentance and prepares the way for God's coming reign. Yet even John, imprisoned and awaiting execution, later asks whether Jesus is truly the expected one. Jesus' response is telling. He points not to doctrine, but to deeds. The blind see, the lame walk, the poor receive good news. Miracles become the language through which Jesus answers doubt. The disciples, too, reflect the cultural complexity of the time. They are not scholars or elites, but fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary men drawn into an extraordinary story. Their reactions to Jesus' miracles often mirror those of the crowd, astonishment mixed with fear, belief mingled with confusion. They witness power that challenges their understanding of God and authority. Through them, the Gospels show that proximity to miracles does not automatically produce understanding. Faith, like healing, unfolds gradually. Women play a particularly significant role in the miracle narratives. In a society where women's voices were often marginalized, Jesus engages them directly. He heals women publicly, affirms their faith, and restores their dignity. These acts carry social as well as spiritual weight. By addressing women's suffering openly, Jesus signals that God's compassion does not operate within restrictive hierarchies. Healing becomes a declaration of worth. The geographic settings of Jesus' miracles further deepen their meaning. Many occur in liminal spaces, roadsides, homes, fields, and border regions. These are places of movement and encounter rather than control. Jesus does not confine healing to sacred spaces. He brings God's restoring power into everyday life, suggesting that holiness is not limited to the temple, but present wherever God's reign is welcomed. Opposition to Jesus' miracles arises not from disbelief in their occurrence, but from anxiety over their implication. Religious leaders often ask not whether a healing happened, but whether it should happen, particularly on the Sabbath. These debates reveal competing visions of God's character. Is God primarily a guardian of boundaries or a giver of life? Jesus' miracles consistently answer in favor of life, asserting that the Sabbath exists to sustain humanity, not constrain mercy. Understanding this context reveals why the miracles provoke such strong reaction. They threaten established interpretations of holiness, authority, and belonging. They suggest that God's kingdom is arriving in unexpected ways, centered on restoration rather than regulation. For those invested in existing structures, this is unsettling. For the suffering and marginalized, it is hope. The early life of Jesus, rooted in humility and shaped by Scripture, prepares him to engage this world with both compassion and authority. He does not approach suffering as an abstract problem, but as a lived reality he knows intimately. His miracles emerge not from detachment, but from deep identification with human need. As Part 2 draws to a close, the stage is fully set. A society burdened by illness, exclusion, and expectation stands ready. A people long for God's intervention. Jesus steps forward not as a distant healer, but as one who knows the weight of ordinary life. The miracles that will follow are not interruptions to this world, they are responses to it. In the next part, we will follow Jesus as his public ministry begins, tracing the early miracles that reveal both his compassion and the radical nature of the kingdom he proclaims. The early miracle-working ministry of Jesus unfolds gradually, woven seamlessly into his proclamation of the kingdom of God. The Gospels do not introduce miracles as a sudden display of power, but as a natural extension of Jesus' presence among the people. Before crowds gather in awe and controversy intensifies, Jesus moves through towns and villages with a quiet authority that draws attention not to himself alone, but to what God is doing through him. These early events establish the pattern by which all his miracles are to be understood. Jesus' public ministry begins in Galilee, a region often overlooked by the religious elite of Jerusalem. Galilee is rural, diverse, and shaped by agricultural life. Its people live closer to the margins of political and religious power, yet they are deeply familiar with hardship, illness, and hope deferred. This setting matters. Jesus does not begin his miracle ministry in the temple courts or among scholars, but among ordinary people whose lives are marked by daily struggle. His miracles arise from proximity, not distance. The first recorded miracle in the Gospel of John takes place not in a synagogue or on a hillside, but at a wedding in Cana. This setting is significant. A wedding represents joy, community, and abundance. When the wine runs out, a potential source of shame for the host, Jesus responds quietly, transforming water into wine. This act is not performed publicly or explained in detail. Only a few are aware of what has occurred. The miracle reveals something essential about Jesus' ministry. His power is exercised not to impress, but to restore joy and preserve dignity. This first sign also establishes a deeper theological pattern. The transformation of water used for ritual purification into wine of extraordinary quality hints at a larger transformation underway. The old order, centered on external observance, is giving way to something new in abundance rooted in God's nearness. Yet, Jesus does not announce this change with proclamation alone. He enacts it through mercy. As Jesus continues through Galilee, he enters synagogues and teaches with authority that surprises his listeners. His words carry weight, not because they cite tradition extensively, but because they speak directly to the heart of Scripture. It is within this teaching ministry that miracles begin to emerge more frequently, responding to human need encountered along the way. One of the earliest public healings occurs in a synagogue, where Jesus encounters a man possessed by an unclean spirit. With a word, Jesus commands the spirit to leave. The reaction is immediate astonishment. Those present do not question whether the act occurred. They question its meaning. What is this? They ask. A new teaching with authority. This response is telling. The miracle is inseparable from Jesus' teaching. Power and word operate together, revealing that God's reign is not theoretical but active. From the synagogue, Jesus moves into private spaces, homes, where illness lingers quietly. He heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law, lifting her from fever. The simplicity of the moment stands out. There is no crowd, no confrontation, no debate. Healing happens naturally, almost incidentally within relationship. She rises and begins to serve, not as obligation, but as restored life expressed through hospitality. This pattern healing leading to renewed participation repeats throughout Jesus' ministry. As word spreads, crowds begin to gather. People bring the sick, the suffering, and the possessed. Jesus responds with compassion, healing many. Yet even as demand increases, the Gospels emphasize Jesus' rhythms of withdrawal. He retreats to solitary places to pray. This detail is crucial. Jesus does not allow miracles to define his identity or dictate his mission. Prayer anchors his work, ensuring that power flows from communion with the Father, rather than from popular acclaim. Among the early miracles, the cleansing of a leper stands as a defining moment. Leprosy carried profound social and religious consequences. Those afflicted were required to live apart, declaring their uncleanness publicly. When a leper approaches Jesus, kneeling and asking to be made clean, he crosses boundaries, both physical and cultural. Jesus' response is extraordinary. He touches the man. This act alone defies convention. Before the man is healed, he is touched, affirmed as worthy of human contact. The healing restores more than health. It restores identity, dignity, and access to community life. Jesus instructs the man to present himself to the priest, honoring the law while transforming its outcome. The miracle reveals a kingdom where purity is not threatened by compassion, but fulfilled through it. Another early event further clarifies Jesus' authority. When friends lower a paralyzed man through a roof to reach him, Jesus responds first with forgiveness rather than healing. This sequence shocks observers. Forgiveness of sins was understood as God's domain. By pronouncing forgiveness, Jesus claims an authority that transcends healing alone. When he then heals the man physically, he confirms that the visible restoration validates the invisible one. The miracle becomes a sign pointing beyond itself to reconciliation between God and humanity. These early events provoke increasing tension with religious leaders. They do not deny Jesus' power, they question its legitimacy. When Jesus heals on the Sabbath, controversy intensifies. The Sabbath was central to Jewish identity, a gift meant to sustain life and rest. Yet interpretations had grown restrictive. Jesus' actions challenged these interpretations directly. By healing on the Sabbath, he asserts that God's compassion does not pause for legal debate. Life takes precedence over regulation. Jesus' early miracles also reveal his responsiveness to faith expressed in diverse ways. A Roman centurion approaches him on behalf of a servant, demonstrating trust that Jesus' word alone is sufficient. Jesus marvels at this faith, noting that such trust is rare even within Israel. This moment expands the scope of Jesus' ministry early on, revealing that God's healing power is not confined by ethnicity or religious status. Similarly, Jesus responds to a woman who has suffered from chronic bleeding for 12 years. She approaches him from behind, believing that touching his garment will bring healing. Her condition has rendered her ritually unclean, excluded from normal social life. When she is healed, Jesus does not allow the moment to remain hidden. He calls her forward, not to shame her, but to affirm her faith publicly. By naming her daughter, he restores her relational identity as well as her health. These early miracle stories share a common thread. Jesus meets people where they are, responding to need with compassion rather than calculation. He does not heal selectively to build a following or reinforce status. Often, those healed are instructed to remain silent. Jesus resists becoming defined solely by his miracles, insisting that they serve the larger purpose of revealing God's kingdom. At the same time, the miracles provoke a range of responses. Some follow in faith, others remain curious but cautious, still others harden in opposition. The early ministry establishes that miracles do not eliminate choice, they intensify it. Each act of healing confronts observers with the question of how they will interpret what they see. The early events also reveal Jesus' humanity. He grows tired, seeks solitude, and experiences the emotional weight of constant demand. His compassion is not detached, it costs him something. This humanity deepens the meaning of his miracles. They are not mechanical acts of power, but expressions of a life poured out in service. As Part 3 draws to a close, the foundation of Jesus' miracle ministry is firmly laid. Healing has begun not as spectacle, but as response. Authority has been revealed not through domination, but through restoration. Faith has emerged not as certainty, but as trust awakened through encounter. These early events prepare us for the growing complexity ahead. As Jesus continues to heal, restore, and confront brokenness, the implications of his miracles will become increasingly difficult to ignore. Compassion will provoke conflict. Authority will invite challenge, and the signs that point to God's kingdom will demand a deeper reckoning from all who witness them. As the miracle-working ministry of Jesus expands, so too does the tension surrounding him. What began as local amazement in Galilee grows into widespread attention that reaches religious authorities, social leaders, and political observers. The miracles, once received primarily as acts of mercy, increasingly function as points of confrontation. They force difficult questions into the open. Who has authority to heal? What does holiness truly mean? And what kind of kingdom is Jesus announcing through these acts? One of the most significant turning points occurs as Jesus' miracles begin to challenge entrenched interpretations of the law. Healing on the Sabbath becomes a recurring flashpoint. In several accounts, Jesus restored individuals on the day set apart for rest, straightening a woman bent for years, healing a man with a withered hand, restoring mobility where life had long been constrained. These acts are not accidental. Jesus knows the implications. He performs them publicly, often within synagogues, placing compassion directly within the framework of religious debate. The conflict that follows reveals a fundamental divide. For many religious leaders, obedience to God is defined by careful boundary-keeping. The Sabbath, meant to preserve life and freedom, has become guarded by layers of restriction. Jesus' miracles expose the cost of this shift. When healing is postponed in the name of regulation, mercy is subordinated to control. Jesus' response reframes the Sabbath itself, insisting that God's rest is inseparable from restoration. By healing, he does not violate the Sabbath, he fulfills its purpose. These moments mark a decisive turn. Opposition hardens. Religious leaders begin to observe Jesus not with curiosity but with intent to accuse. The miracles, rather than resolving debate, intensify it. Power is no longer the question, authority is. If Jesus can heal with a word, and if his healing redefines holiness, then he threatens existing structures of religious legitimacy. The miracles expose what lies beneath belief, fear, pride, longing, resistance, and offer restoration not only from illness, but from fragmentation within the soul. In responding to Jesus' miracles, individuals and communities reveal who they are becoming. The path ahead will bring these tensions to their fullest expression, as Jesus' acts of healing and restoration lead toward a climactic revelation of God's loved one that will redefine faith and healing forever. The miracles of Jesus reach their climactic meaning as his journey moves steadily toward Jerusalem. What once unfolded along Galilean roads now gathers weight and consequence. Healing, restoration, and authority converge with mounting opposition, and the question that has followed every miracle, who is this, demands an answer. At this point in the narrative, the miracles no longer merely reveal compassion, they expose the cost of God's love in a world resistant to transformation. The turning toward Jerusalem signals more than a geographic shift. It marks a theological crescendo. Jesus has demonstrated power over illness, nature, spirits, and even death. Yet he now speaks openly of suffering and rejection. This pairing is deliberate. The miracles have shown what God's kingdom brings. The journey to Jerusalem will reveal what that kingdom costs. The climax of the miracle story, therefore, is not found only in a single act, but in how healing and sacrifice are held together. Among the final and most striking miracles before Jesus' entry into Jerusalem is the raising of Lazarus. This event stands as a decisive sign, drawing together every theme that has preceded it. Lazarus's illness, death, and restoration unfold slowly, allowing tension to build. Jesus delays his arrival, not out of indifference but purpose. When he finally comes, grief is fully present. Martha and Mary voice both faith and frustration, revealing the complexity of trust when God's timing wounds as well as heals. At Lazarus's tomb, Jesus weeps. This moment reveals the heart behind the miracles. Power does not shield him from sorrow. He enters grief fully, standing among mourners not as a distant healer, but as one who shares their pain. When he calls Lazarus from the tomb, life responds to his voice. Death yields, not through ritual or struggle, but through command. The miracle reveals that Jesus' authority extends even over the grave. Yet this act also seals the course toward the cross. The raising of Lazarus provokes belief among many, but it also hardens the resolve of Jesus' opponents. The miracle is undeniable, and its implications are dangerous. If Jesus continues, he will draw all attention to himself. From this point forward, plans to arrest and eliminate him accelerate. Life restored in one place becomes the catalyst for death elsewhere. The miracle exposes the cost of confronting a world invested in preserving control. Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem follows closely. The crowd celebrate, recalling his mighty deeds. Shouts of praise echo through the streets as he rides into the city. Yet the celebration is shaped by misunderstanding. Many expect a king who will wield power visibly and decisively. They celebrate miracles without fully grasping their meaning. Jesus enters Jerusalem not to seize power, but to surrender himself. Within the city, Jesus continues to heal, even as danger surrounds him. In the temple courts, he restores sight and mobility, acts of mercy performed at the very heart of religious life. These healings stand in stark contrast to the corruption he confronts. By cleansing the temple and healing within it, Jesus reveals that God's house is meant to be a place of restoration, not exclusion. The miracles here function as both indictment and invitation, condemning misuse of sacred space, while offering healing to those long marginalized. As the narrative moves toward its darkest hour, the miracles begin to recede from view, not because power is diminished, but because purpose has sharpened. Jesus does not heal himself when arrested. He does not call upon divine power to escape trial. The miracles that once flowed freely now give way to silence and restraint. This absence is itself climactic. The one who healed others chooses not to preserve his own life through power. Even in this restraint, mercy breaks through. When a disciple strikes a servant during Jesus' arrest, Jesus heals the wounded man. This final act of healing before the crucifixion encapsulates his mission. Even as violence closes in, Jesus responds with restoration. The miracle stands as a last visible sign of the kingdom. He proclaims a kingdom not defended by force, but revealed through love. The crucifixion represents the apparent negation of everything the miracles seem to promise. Healing gives way to suffering. Restoration yields to death. Those who hoped for deliverance watch as Jesus is executed. For many, the miracles now appear powerless against the machinery of injustice. The question resurfaces with painful intensity. If Jesus can heal others, why does he not save himself? Yet the Gospels insist that this moment is not defeat, but fulfillment. The miracles have prepared the reader to understand what unfolds. Each healing has revealed a God who enters suffering rather than avoiding it. Each restoration has pointed toward a deeper redemption. The cross, then, is not the denial of God's power, but its most radical expression. Love is revealed not through domination, but through self-giving. The resurrection emerges as the ultimate sign, gathering all miracles into one definitive act. The empty tomb does not negate the healings that came before, it completes them. The resurrection declares that the life Jesus restored in fragments, blind eyes opened, bodies strengthened, the dead raised temporarily, is now fully and finally victorious over death. What the miracles began, the resurrection fulfills. In this climactic moment, faith and healing are redefined. Healing is no longer understood solely as the removal of immediate suffering, but as participation in a new creation. The resurrection does not promise that all illness will vanish now, but it guarantees that death will not have the final word. The miracles of Jesus find their ultimate meaning here. They are foretastes of a restored world. The risen Jesus still bears wounds. This detail is crucial. Resurrection does not erase suffering, it transforms it. The scars remain as testimony that God's victory does not bypass pain, but redeems it. The miracles that once healed bodies now point toward a healing that encompasses all of creation. As Jesus appears to his followers after the resurrection, fear gives way to joy and confusion to understanding. The miracles they witnessed are reinterpreted in light of the empty tomb. What once seemed isolated acts of power are now seen as signs of a kingdom that has broken into history decisively. The climax of the miracle story, therefore, is not a single healing, but the revelation of God's heart through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Healing and sacrifice meet. Power and humility converge. The miracles have led inexorably to this moment, where faith is no longer rooted merely in what Jesus can do, but in who he is. As Part 6 concludes, the journey of faith and healing reaches its central revelation. The miracles of Jesus have shown that God draws near to suffering, restores what is broken, and ultimately conquers death not by avoiding it, but by passing through it. The kingdom Jesus proclaimed has been unveiled fully, not as a realm of spectacle, but as a reign of life born through love. What remains now is to listen more deeply to what these miracles mean for faith, for hope, and for life lived in light of God's redeeming work. With the climax of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection in view, the miracles take on their fullest theological meaning. They are no longer isolated moments of healing or power, but a coherent message about who God is, how he relates to human suffering, and what his kingdom truly entails. The deeper meaning of the miracles emerges when they are read not merely as events in the past, but as revelations of God's heart and intentions for the world. At their core, the miracles of Jesus proclaim that God is not distant from human pain. In a religious imagination that often pictured God as enthroned far above earthly struggle, Jesus' actions offer a startling correction. God draws near. He touches diseased skin, listens to desperate cries, and enters spaces of grief. The miracles reveal a God who does not remain untouched by suffering, but who chooses to encounter it directly. This nearness is not incidental. It is central to God's redemptive purpose. The repeated emphasis on compassion in the miracle narratives underscores this truth. The Gospels frequently note that Jesus is moved with compassion before he heals. This language reveals that miracles are not driven by obligation or demonstration, but by love. God's power is inseparable from his mercy. Healing flows not from cold authority, but from a heart responsive to human need. In this way, the miracles redefine divine power itself, not as control, but as restorative love. Another central message of the miracles concerns the nature of God's kingdom. Jesus proclaims that the kingdom of God has drawn near, and the miracles serve as visible signs of this nearness. They offer glimpses of what life looks like when God's reign is active. In the kingdom revealed through Jesus, blindness gives way to sight, exclusion yields to belonging, and death is confronted by life. The miracles do not describe the kingdom in abstract terms, they embody it. Yet the kingdom Jesus reveals is not fully realized in the present moment. The miracles heal many, but not all. They restore life, yet death still occurs. This tension is intentional. The miracles point forward as much as they act in the present. They are signs of a future restoration breaking into the present in partial but powerful ways. God's message here is one of hope shaped by patience. Healing is real, but it is also provisional, pointing toward a fullness yet to come. The miracles also reveal God's priorities. Again and again, Jesus responds to those on the margins: lepers, the poor, wind, foreigners, and sinners. These choices are not accidental. They reveal a kingdom oriented toward the vulnerable. God's attention is drawn not to those with status or certainty, but to those who live with need and dependence. The miracles proclaim that no one is invisible to God, and that dignity is restored alongside health. This emphasis challenges religious assumptions about worthiness. In many miracle accounts, those healed are not praised for moral perfection, but for trust. Faith, as revealed in these stories, is not flawless belief, but relational openness. It is the willingness to come, to ask, to reach out. God's message through these encounters is that faith is not a prerequisite of strength, but an admission of need. Healing flows not from self-sufficiency, but from dependence. At the same time, the miracles confront distorted understandings of holiness. Jesus' willingness to touch the unclean and heal on the Sabbath reveals that holiness is not compromised by compassion. On the contrary, compassion is its truest expression. God's holiness is not fragile, threatened by contact with suffering. It is powerful enough to transform it. The miracles declare that God's purity is active, not defensive, and that his righteousness restores rather than excludes. The deeper meaning of the miracles also lies in how they address fear. Fear permeates the miracle narratives: fear of illness, fear of social rejection, fear of chaos, fear of death. Jesus' repeated command, "Do not be afraid," is not a dismissal of danger, but an invitation to trust. The miracles demonstrate that fear does not have ultimate authority. God's presence reorders reality, creating space where fear can loosen its grip. Importantly, the miracles do not remove all suffering from the lives of those healed. They do not promise immunity from future pain. Instead, they reveal God's commitment to be present and active within a broken world. The deeper message is not that suffering will always be avoided, but that it will never be meaningless. In Jesus, God enters suffering in order to redeem it from within. The resurrection reframes all previous miracles in this light. It declares that God's final answer to human brokenness is not temporary relief, but new creation. The miracles that restored bodies now point toward a restored cosmos. The deeper meaning here is eschatological, concerned with ultimate things. The healings Jesus performs are foretastes of a world fully reconciled to God, where wholeness is complete and enduring. The miracles also reveal something essential about Jesus himself. They are not simply acts he performs, they are expressions of who he is. In healing the sick, he reveals himself as the giver of life. In forgiving sins, he reveals divine authority. In raising the dead, he reveals victory over death. The miracles function as self-disclosure. They invite recognition, not just gratitude. Yet recognition is not forced. The miracles consistently preserve human freedom. People are invited, not coerced, to believe. Some respond with worship, others with skepticism, and still others with hostility. God's message through the miracles respects this freedom. Love does not compel allegiance. It invites response. Faith remains a choice shaped by encounter. Another layer of meaning emerges in the communal impact of miracles. Healing often leads to reintegration, restored relationships, renewed participation in worship, and reconnection to community life. This reveals that God's salvation is not merely individual, it has social dimension. God's kingdom restores people to one another as well as to Him. The miracles proclaim a vision of wholeness that includes community, justice, and shared life. The miracles also serve as a critique of religious systems that prioritize control over compassion. By healing in ways that disrupt established norms, Jesus reveals that any structure resistant to restoration has drifted from God's heart. The deeper message here is one of continual reform. God's work cannot be contained by tradition alone. It must remain responsive to human need. Ultimately, the miracles of Jesus proclaim a God who is faithful to His promises. The prophets spoke of a time when healing and restoration would mark God's renewed action in the world. Through Jesus, those promises begin to take visible form. The miracles affirm that God has not abandoned creation. He is actively working toward its redemption. As Part 7 draws to a close, the deeper meaning of the miracles comes into focus. They are signs of God's nearness, expressions of His compassion, revelations of His kingdom, and invitations into faith. They do not merely answer the question of what Jesus can do, they reveal who God is and what He desires for humanity. The miracles declare that God's ultimate intention is life restored, reconciled, and renewed. They call us not only to marvel, but to trust, not only to observe, but to follow. In the next part, we will consider how this message speaks into modern life, shaping how faith, healing, and hope are understood today. The miracles of Jesus speak across centuries because they address realities that remain deeply human. Illness, fear, exclusion, uncertainty, and longing have not faded with time. What has changed is the context in which these struggles are experienced. Modern life, shaped by technology, medicine, and rapid communication, often promises control and solutions. Yet beneath these advancements, the same questions persist. Where is God in suffering? What does faith look like when healing is incomplete? And how should the miracles of Jesus shape the way believers live today? One of the most immediate applications of Jesus' miracles lies in how they reframe suffering. In contemporary culture, suffering is often viewed as failure, something to be eliminated quickly or hidden from view. When healing does not come, disappointment easily turns into despair or cynicism. The miracles of Jesus challenge this framework. They do not deny suffering, nor do they suggest that faith guarantees exemption from it. Instead, they reveal a God who enters suffering with compassion and purpose. For modern believers, this means that faith is not measured by the absence of pain, but by trust in God's presence within it. Jesus' miracles remind us that God's care is not limited to outcomes we can see immediately. Even when healing is delayed or partial, God's nearness remains real. This perspective offers resilience in a world that often equates unanswered prayers with divine absence. The miracles also reshape how modern life understands healing itself. Today, healing is often reduced to physical cure alone. While medical science is a gift, Jesus' miracles reveal a more holistic vision. Healing includes restoration of dignity, relationship, and hope. A blind man receiving sight is also restored to community. A woman healed of chronic illness is publicly affirmed and named. In modern life, this invites believers to consider healing as something broader than physical wellness, encompassing mental, emotional, social, and spiritual wholeness. This holistic vision has practical implications. It calls communities of faith to care not only for bodies, but for those burdened by isolation, stigma, and unseen pain. Jesus' miracles challenge modern believers to ask who remains excluded today, not by illness alone, but by poverty, mental health struggles, disability, or social marginalization. The kingdom revealed through Jesus' healings invites active compassion toward those whom society often overlooks. The way Jesus responds to faith also offers guidance for modern spirituality. In the miracle stories, faith is not intellectual certainty or moral perfection. It is relational trust, sometimes tentative, sometimes desperate, often incomplete. This challenges modern pressures toward either rigid certainty or complete skepticism. Jesus meets people where they are, responding to openness rather than flawless belief. For those navigating doubt, this is deeply reassuring. The miracles show that questioning does not disqualify faith. Fear does not cancel trust. Even imperfect belief can become the doorway to transformation. In a modern context where faith is often portrayed as either unshakable confidence or blind acceptance, Jesus' miracles offer a more compassionate vision, one that allows space for struggle and growth. The miracles also speak powerfully into modern conversations about power and leadership. In many contemporary systems, power is associated with control, efficiency, and dominance. Jesus' miracles invert this logic. His power is expressed through service, vulnerability, and mercy. He heals without exploiting dependence, restores without demanding loyalty, and withdraws rather than capitalizing on a claim. Applied to modern life, this challenges leaders in churches, workplaces, and communities to examine how authority is exercised. Our power and influence used to protect the vulnerable or preserve control. Jesus' miracles model leadership that prioritizes restoration over recognition. They invite a reimagining of success rooted in service rather than status. Another modern application lies in how Jesus' miracles address fear. Fear remains a defining force in contemporary life. Fear of illness, economic instability, loss of identity, and death itself. The miracle narratives do not deny these fears, they confront them directly. Again and again, Jesus' presence transforms spaces of fear into spaces of trust. For modern believers, this means that faith is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite. The miracles remind us that fear does not have ultimate authority. God's kingdom introduces a deeper reality in which fear is acknowledged but not obeyed. This offers courage not rooted in optimism, but in trust that God remains active even when outcomes are uncertain. The resurrection-centered meaning of the miracles also reshapes modern expectations of justice and hope. In a world where suffering often appears unresolved and injustice persists, Jesus' miracles point toward a future where restoration is complete. They do not offer escapism, but promise. This hope sustains ethical commitment in the present. Because God's kingdom is coming, acts of compassion, healing, and justice now are not futile. They participate in a larger redemption already underway. This perspective guards against both despair and complacency. On one hand, it prevents resignation to brokenness as inevitable. On the other, it resists the illusion that human effort alone can fix everything. The miracles teach a posture of faithful participation, working toward healing and justice while trusting God for ultimate restoration. Modern life also raises complex questions about unanswered prayers for healing. The miracles of Jesus can be misused to suggest that lack of healing reflects lack of faith. The gospel narratives resist this conclusion. Not everyone Jesus encounters is healed immediately, and not every act of faith results in visible restoration. The deeper message of the miracles is not that God heals on demand, but that He is faithful even when healing unfolds differently than hoped. This invites a more mature faith, one that holds hope and humility together. Modern believers are encouraged to pray boldly while trusting God's wisdom and timing. The miracles do not teach entitlement, they teach dependence. They invite confidence rooted in God's character rather than control over outcomes. The communal dimension of Jesus' miracles also speaks into modern individualism. Healing often leads to restored relationship and shared celebration. This challenges the tendency to treat faith as a private experience detached from community responsibility. The miracles reveal that God's work is relational, drawing people back into shared life. In practical terms, this calls modern faith communities to become places of welcome, patience, and restoration. Communities shaped by the miracles of Jesus should be marked not by exclusion or judgment, but by attentiveness to human need. They should reflect a kingdom where people are known, named, and valued. Finally, the miracles of Jesus invite modern readers to reconsider where they expect God to work. In a culture drawn to visibility and immediacy, Jesus' miracles remind us that God often works quietly through presence, compassion, and steady faithfulness. Healing may come through medicine, through community support, through gradual inner renewal, or through strength to endure. Applied to daily life, the miracles encourage attentiveness to God's activity beyond dramatic moments. They invite gratitude for small restorations, courage in ongoing struggle, and trust that God's kingdom is nearer than it appears. As Part 8 concludes, the miracles of Jesus emerge not as relics of a distant past, but as living testimony shaping how faith is practiced today. They call modern believers to a faith that is compassionate, patient, and hopeful, a faith that seeks healing while trusting God's deeper work of restoration. In the next part, we will step back to reflect more deeply on the lessons these miracles offer, drawing together themes of faith, suffering, hope, and God's enduring faithfulness. When we step back from the individual miracle accounts and consider them together, a deeper pattern emerges, one that reshapes how faith, suffering, and hope are understood. The miracles of Jesus are not scattered acts of kindness without connection. They form a coherent witness to God's character and to the kind of response that life under His reign requires. Reflecting on these stories invites us into a slower, more attentive posture, where meaning unfolds through repetition, contrast, and lived encounter. One of the most enduring lessons of Jesus' miracles is that faith is relational before it is doctrinal. Many who experience healing do not articulate refined theology. They come with need, trust, and willingness. Their faith is expressed through movement, approaching Jesus, calling out, reaching, waiting. This challenges any understanding of faith that treats it primarily as intellectual agreement. In the miracle narratives, faith is not proven by certainty but by orientation. It is the turning of one's life toward Jesus, even when understanding remains incomplete. At the same time, the miracles reveal that faith is not uniform. There is no single pattern that guarantees healing. Some are healed because of their own trust, others because of the faith of friends or family. Some receive healing without explicitly asking for it. Others ask repeatedly and wait. This diversity teaches that God's response cannot be reduced to formula. Faith is personal and dynamic, shaped by context, history, and relationship. The miracles resist any attempt to systematize God's grace. Another significant lesson emerges in how Jesus treats those who are overlooked or silenced by society. Again and again, He pauses for those others hurry past. Blind beggars are told to be quiet. Jesus listens. A bleeding woman hides in the crowd. Jesus draws her into the light. Children are dismissed as unimportant. Jesus welcomes them. These moments reveal a kingdom that moves at the pace of compassion rather than efficiency. Reflecting on this pattern invites us to examine our own attentiveness. Whose suffering do we overlook because it is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unfamiliar? The miracles teach that God's work often begins with truly seeing those at the margins. Healing flows from recognition as much as from power. The miracles also offer a sobering lesson about resistance. Not all who witness God's work respond with faith. Some respond with fear, others with hostility. The religious leaders who oppose Jesus are not portrayed as ignorant, but as threatened. Their struggle reveals that proximity to the sacred does not guarantee openness to transformation. The miracles expose how attachment to control, status, or certainty can harden the heart against God's renewing work. This invites careful self-reflection. It is easier to admire miracles from a distance than to allow them to challenge deeply held assumptions. The question raised by the miracle stories is not only whether we believe God can heal, but whether we are willing to be changed by what His healing reveals. Transformation often requires relinquishing power, rethinking boundaries, and embracing vulnerability. Another lesson emerges in the tension between gratitude and discipleship. Many receive healing, fewer remain to follow. This distinction highlights a truth often overlooked. Receiving a gift is not the same as embracing a calling. The miracles offer restoration freely, but discipleship asks for ongoing commitment. Gratitude may be momentary, following requires perseverance. This challenges modern tendencies to approach faith primarily as a means of personal benefit. The miracle stories remind us that God's gifts are invitations into deeper relationship, not endpoints. Healing opens the door to a reoriented life shaped by trust, obedience, and love. The miracles also teach us about patience in God's work. Some healings are immediate, others unfold slowly or incompletely. Jesus does not explain every delay. Instead, he invites trust in God's timing. This patience stands in contrast to human urgency. Reflecting on the miracles encourages a faith that waits without resignation, holding hope even when outcomes remain unclear. Another profound lesson lies in how Jesus integrates healing with forgiveness. By restoring body and forgiving sins together, he reveals that human brokenness is layered. Physical suffering, spiritual estrangement, and relational fracture are often intertwined. The miracles teach that God's redemption addresses the whole person. Healing is not merely about function, but about reconciliation with God, with others, and with oneself. This holistic vision challenges compartmentalized approaches to faith and life. It invites reflection on where fragmentation persists, where bodies may be healthy but spirits weary, or where spiritual devotion exists alongside relational isolation. The miracles remind us that God's intention is wholeness, not partial restoration. The presence of fear in the miracle narratives offers another lesson worth lingering over. Fear is never mocked or dismissed. It is acknowledged and addressed. When storms rage and disciples panic, Jesus calms both sea and hearts. When confronted with the unknown, he speaks peace. The miracles teach that fear does not disqualify faith. It reveals where trust needs to deepen. This has lasting relevance. Fear remains a powerful force in shaping decisions, beliefs, and relationships. The miracle stories invite us to bring fear into God's presence rather than allowing it to dictate our actions. They suggest that peace is not found in control, but in trust that God remains present and active. One of the most striking lessons emerges in the connection between miracles and suffering at the cross. The miracles might suggest a triumphant path free from pain, yet Jesus' journey leads directly into suffering and death. This teaches that God's power is not opposed to weakness. On the contrary, it is revealed through it. The miracles prepare us to understand that healing and sacrifice are not contradictory, but complementary within God's redemptive plan. This reframes how believers understand unanswered prayers. The absence of immediate healing does not signal the absence of God's care. The cross stands as the ultimate sign that God is at work even when outcomes appear tragic. The miracles, read in light of the resurrection, affirm that God's final answer is life, even when the path toward it passes through suffering. The resurrection itself becomes the lens through which all miracles are finally interpreted. Each healing, each restoration, each moment of compassion points toward a future where wholeness is complete. This future hope does not negate present pain. It sustains faith within it. The miracles teach us to live between promise and fulfillment, participating in God's healing work now, while trusting Him for what remains unresolved. Reflecting on the miracles also invites gratitude for the ordinary forms of healing that often go unnoticed. Not every restoration comes through dramatic intervention. Some come through time, community, medicine, forgiveness, or renewed perspective. The miracles expand our imagination, helping us recognize God's work in forms that may not resemble biblical signs, yet still bear the mark of His compassion. As these lessons accumulate, a coherent vision of faith emerges. Faith is not certainty without struggle. It is trust sustained through encounter. It is openness to transformation. Even when change is unsettling, it is willingness to follow, not only to receive. The extended reflection on Jesus' miracles leads us toward humility. They remind us that God's ways exceed our expectations and resist our control. They call us to attend carefully to suffering, to hope, and to the quiet work of God unfolding in our midst. As Part 9 comes to a close, the miracles stand not as puzzles to be solved, but as invitations to be lived into. They ask us not only what we believe about Jesus, but how his healing presence reshapes our lives, our communities, and our understanding of God's enduring faithfulness. In the final part, we will gather these reflections into a concluding vision, one that invites response, trust, and a gentle commitment to live in light of the healing kingdom Jesus reveals. As the journey through the miracles of Jesus comes to a close, we are left not with a catalogue of wonders, but with a vision of God's heart made visible. The miracles do not ask to be admired from a distance. They ask to be remembered, trusted, and lived with. They reveal a God who draws near to suffering, a kingdom that restores rather than excludes, and a way of faith that is grounded in relationship rather than certainty. From the first quiet sign at a wedding to the final healing offered in the shadow of arrest, the miracles trace a consistent pattern. Jesus meets people where they are. He responds to need without calculation, to faith without precondition, and to fear with presence. He heals bodies, yes, but he also restores dignity, renews community, and reorients hope. Each miracle becomes a doorway through which God's compassion enters a fractured world. What stands out most when all is said and done is not the scale of power on display, but the manner in which that power is used. Jesus never heals to dominate, never restores to control, and never performs signs to secure loyalty. His miracles are acts of gift, not leverage. They flow from mercy rather than strategy. In a world accustomed to power that protects itself, the miracles of Jesus reveal a different kind of authority, one that gives itself away for the sake of others. The Gospels are careful to show that these miracles do not eliminate choice. Some respond with faith that deepens into discipleship, others marvel briefly and move on. Still others resist, unsettled by what healing implies about their assumptions, their control, or their vision of God. The miracles illuminate the heart as much as they restore the body. They ask a question that echoes beyond the page. How will you respond to a God who heals like this? This question is not meant to pressure belief or demand immediate resolution. The miracle stories honor the slow work of faith. They allow space for doubt, fear, and incomplete understanding. Even the disciples, who witness more than anyone else, learn gradually. Faith matures through encounter, reflection, and trust sustained over time. In this sense, the miracles invite patience with God, with ourselves, and with one another. Read together, the miracles also correct a narrow view of healing. They do not promise a life free from pain. Jesus himself enters suffering fully and does not escape it through power. Instead, the miracles point toward a deeper hope, a hope anchored not in avoiding death, but in overcoming it. The resurrection gathers every healing into one decisive affirmation: life, not brokenness, has the final word. This hope does not minimize present suffering, it gives it context and direction. For those who have prayed for healing and waited without the outcome they desired, the miracles offer neither dismissal nor blame. They offer companionship. They reveal a God who remains present even when healing unfolds differently than hoped. The scars of the risen Jesus remind us that redemption does not erase wounds, it transforms their meaning. Faith in this light is not measured by results, but by trust in a faithful God whose purposes extend beyond what we can see. The miracles also leave us with a vision of community shaped by compassion. Healing often leads to reintegration back into families, worship, and shared life. The kingdom Jesus reveals is relational at its core. It draws people back together. This challenges communities of faith in every generation to become spaces of welcome, patience, and care, places where those carrying visible and invisible wounds are seen and valued. As this series has unfolded, one truth has remained consistent: the miracles of Jesus are not relics of a distant past. They are testimonies that continue to speak. They shape how believers pray, how they understand suffering, how they practice mercy, and how they hope. They invite a way of life attentive to need, courageous in compassion, and grounded in trust that God is near. If there is a gentle call to action embedded within these stories, it is this: remain open to God's presence in unexpected places, open to compassion that interrupts routine, open to a faith that grows not through certainty, but through relationship. The miracles encourage us to notice where restoration may already be unfolding quietly in reconciled relationships, renewed strength to endure, or courage to hope again. They also invite us to participate. While we cannot heal as Jesus heals, we can reflect his compassion. We can listen where others rush past. We can protect dignity where it is threatened. We can choose mercy over convenience, presence over distance. In doing so, we bear witness to the same kingdom the miracles proclaim. As you carry these stories forward, allow them to linger. Return to them not only when you seek answers, but when you need reminder that God sees, that God cares, and that God's healing work is broader and deeper than we often imagine. Let the miracles of Jesus shape your expectations of God, not by narrowing them to outcomes, but by expanding them to include trust, patience, and hope. Thank you for walking through the miracles of Jesus, a journey of faith and healing with Divine Word Archives. May these accounts continue to deepen your faith, steady your hope, and inspire a life attentive to the quiet, restoring work of God in the world today.